Integrating quotes. How do we use research in our writing effectively while making sure to give credit to the sources of the information we use? Integrate means to combine one thing with another so that they become a whole. We are combining another person's thoughts and feelings on a topic with our own to form a new piece of writing when we do research. As we use the thoughts and feelings of others in our own writing, we can quote a person directly, which is to repeat or copy a group of words from a text while indicating that we are not the original author, or we can paraphrase, which is a rewording of something written or spoken by someone else. Both a quote and paraphrasing needs a reference to the source of the information. If we forget that reference, that's when we are plagiarizing, which is to take the work or ideas of someone else and pass it off as if it is our own. To avoid plagiarizing, we collect information about a source while we are researching. This information is organized into a works cited entry. If we decide to take a statement from a source and quote it directly or reword it, we can use information from the works cited entry to signal to our reader that we are giving them someone else's thoughts and feelings. So to integrate this quote, I could say RevWarTalk.com reports, and RevWarTalk.com refers to the source of this quote. When we combine words that we copy from a text, quotes, with our own writing, we use a signal phrase to integrate the words we've copied into a sentence of our own. Here's that same quote from the previous slide. RevWarTalk.com reports is the signal phrase. It introduces the quote, but it also tells us where this quote came from. If we do not use a signal phrase, we make a mistake that's called a dropped quote. Notice here that the quote begins the sentence, but it is missing a signal phrase. There is no introduction for this quote. Signal phrases come in two types. The first is called a short phrase. A short phrase signal uses a reference to the quote source, which is usually the author's name or the website name, in this case, Elbert Hubbard, combined with a verb that indicates that a quote is incoming and also what the quote does. So we can choose a verb here that makes the most sense. We could say asserts, claims, argues. In this case, we chose to use declares. Elbert Hubbard declares, "Do not take life too seriously. You will never get out of it alive." The second type of signal phrase is a complete sentence. A complete sentence uses an independent clause, a group of words that can stand on their own and have meaning, combined with a colon. So notice that this sentence does not end with a period, but it is an independent clause, a group of words that has meaning and can stand on its own. And we end it with a colon to indicate that right after this, we will have a quote. Referring to a source on a works cited page after we give a quote is called using a citation. Anytime we have a complete sentence introduction and we don't mention the source of the information in our introduction, we have to use this citation so we know where the information came from. So here is a complete sentence introduction. Colonel Ty gained renown fighting for the crown. And notice that nowhere in that introduction did I mention RevWarTalk.com or the title of this article, which is Colonel Ty. So we use a parenthetical citation so we can still refer to where this came from, which is just a word or maybe the author's name in parentheses at the end of the quote so that we can indicate where this came from. Since the article on the works cited page is called Colonel Ty, and that's the first thing that shows up, I put that part of the title in parentheses to show that that's where this quote came from. Here is an example of an article with several quotes that have been included. Have these quotes been correctly integrated? Pause this video and see if you can spot any mistakes in the way that the author has integrated their quotes. The quotes are all in bold font. Remember, when we integrate quotes, they should be introduced and not simply dropped into our writing. So the first quote is missing that introduction here. The second quote is missing the introduction here. The third quote is missing the introduction here. The final statement that is in bold is not a quote, but a paraphrasing. And so when we paraphrase, we don't need an introduction since it's our own words. Remember, quotes should be cited too. We need a reference to where they came from. We can do that in our introduction, or we can do it in a citation after the quote. Notice, though, that our first quote does not have a citation. Second quote does not have a citation. Third quote does not have a citation. And we would also need one when we paraphrase, because otherwise, how do we even know that it's research if there's no citation to indicate that we borrowed that information from someone else? If we have a complete list of all of the information about the sources that we intend to quote or paraphrase in our writing, then we can use that works cited list to make sure that we integrate quotes correctly and we don't drop quotes or plagiarize. Normally, we use authors' names from the works cited page in our signal phrases or citations. So for the first works cited entry, we would use the name Lloyd. For the second one, we would use Viscusi. For the third, we would use Wikipedia. And for the fourth, we would also use Wikipedia. Maybe you can spot a problem already, though, with using the first word for all four of these sources. Since two of the sources both come from Wikipedia, it would be confusing for our reader if we used Wikipedia in a parenthetical citation, because we wouldn't know which of the two that we were referring to. So anytime you have two sources with the same author, you move on to the next thing in the works cited entry to use in your citation. So we would use Julius for the first Wikipedia article and structural for the second Wikipedia article. Pause this video and see if you can spot where each quote has been introduced and where the author refers to the source of the quote using this works cited page. The first quote has a citation after the quote with the word structural, which refers to that Wikipedia article called Structural History of the Roman Military. So they have their reference to their quote. And you can see that at the beginning of the quote, it has a colon. So they must have used a complete sentence to introduce this quote. So this has been fixed now, and it has an introduction. Our soldier will join 10 other tent groups to form a centuria, which will then combine to form a cohort. And it has a citation. So we don't have a drop quote, and we haven't plagiarized. The second quote has Julius in parentheses. That refers to the Wikipedia article called Julius Caesar. So we know where this quote came from. And to introduce the quote, they have just the word as. If we read this integration, it says, as each legion was normally partnered with an approximately equal number of allied non-Roman auxilia troops, our soldier might be fighting for more than his life as his unit marches to battle. Notice how the author made the quote fit with the grammar of their own sentence. This is not a short phrase or a complete sentence introduction. It's what we call a full integration. They've actually made the quote fit their own writing. This is the best way to introduce quotes, but it's also pretty challenging. The third quote has a short phrase introduction. It says, as James Lloyd notes. And so it doesn't need a citation because we know that this quote came from the article Roman Army by James Lloyd because they told us the author's name in the introduction. And then the final one uses a citation with the name Viscusi, which is the article Julius Caesar by Peter L. Viscusi. And remember, this one is not a quote, it's a paraphrase, which is why there are no quotation marks around it. But even though we put it in our own words, or the author here put it in his own words, we still have to have a citation so we know where that thought or idea came from. All right, guys, let's see if we can do this on our own. And practice using a works cited page to create citations and introductions to quotes so that we know that a quote is coming in our writing and we know where that quote came from.